I'm Rachel Merritt, 34 years old, and I thought my wedding day would be filled with family hugs and happy tears. Instead, I stood in a hotel suite holding my phone, reading a text from my father that said, "The whole family's busy, send pics. No smiley face, no warmth, just 7 cold words from the people who raised me." My hands shook as I waited for a follow-up that never came by noon. I opened Instagram to distract myself and saw them all on the beach in Miami, bronzed and laughing like it was just another Saturday. Their caption said, "A perfect family day," and in that moment, I understood exactly where I stood in theirs. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been left out of something that should have been yours. I was raised in a small town in northern Kentucky, the kind of place where church potlucks and Friday night football games stitched the community together. My dad ran a heating and air business, and my mom spent 30 years teaching 3rd grade. Money was always tight, but we had rules show up when it counts. Work hard and keep your word. Those lessons stuck with me more than I realized back then. I earned a scholarship, left home at 18, and carved a quiet path in tech, long hours, no shortcuts, no handouts. When I landed my first big contract, I didn't celebrate with a shopping spree. I paid off my parents' car loan and set money aside to help Brandon launch his dream. That was the kind of family we were, or so I thought. Brandon was always different. He was charming in that way that made people lean in, always talking about big plans. Our parents beamed when he talked about being an entrepreneur, even when his ventures fizzled out. They called it ambition. I called it chaos. Still, when he pitched a new idea about luxury yacht events in Miami, I believed in him. I invested slowly, cautiously, and every time he said, "Just a little more," I wired the funds without a second thought. I figured that's what family does. We help each other rise. Dylan and I had picked a small coastal venue for our wedding. Nothing extravagant, just warm and simple, with flowers grown by a friend of mine and a string quartet from the local college. We left seats open for my parents, my brother, even a few cousins. I expected them to come late or call with a flight delay. I didn't expect silence. I certainly didn't expect to see their smiling faces plastered across social media, sun-kissed and cocktail in hand, while I stood at the altar without them. I left a comment on the post, just one word: "Congrats." No one replied. Not my mother, not my father, not even Brandon. That night, after the reception wound down and the last candle flickered out, I sat on the hotel bed with my phone resting on my knees. Dylan was asleep beside me, his hand still wrapped gently around mine. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to Taylor Monroe, my friend since college, and someone who'd quietly warned me months ago that Brandon's numbers didn't add up. I clicked call. I didn't know it then, but that phone call would be the first domino. The rest would fall fast. Taylor picked up on the second ring. I didn't have to explain much. She already knew the wedding had come and gone and my family hadn't shown. I told her I was ready to see the numbers, all of them, no more waiting on updates or vague excuses. She didn't hesitate. "Send me the login," she said. "I'll dig tonight." I stayed in the hotel room after Dylan fell asleep, the city lights casting a pale wash across the carpet. My laptop rested on the nightstand. I opened our shared business accounts and passed Taylor everything she needed: passwords, access codes, the whole archive. Then I sat there staring at the ceiling, waiting for her to call back. It was almost midnight when my phone buzzed. Taylor had barely cleared her throat before she got to the point. "The numbers don't look right," she said. "In fact, they're a mess." She walked me through the last 6 months of transactions, nearly $80,000, listed under vague line items like consulting or event supplies. No receipts, no attached files, nothing but loose entries that seemed designed to avoid questions. She paused, then asked if I recognized a charge from a luxury auto dealer just outside Coral Gables. $25,000, one transaction. I didn't have to think long. Brandon had posted a photo a few weeks back, standing next to a silver Porsche, grinning like he'd made it. I'd assumed it was leased or part of some promo. Now I knew. That car had been paid for with my savings. There was more. Another $12,000 spent at a boutique outfitter in Brickell, the kind that sold yacht gear and designer sunglasses. $7,000 for a pair of branded lounge chairs. 3 more for imported liquor labeled as client entertainment. Taylor stopped listing after a while and just sent the spreadsheet to my email. "Look through it," she said. "But Rachel, it's bad." I opened the file and scrolled in silence. Each row hit harder than the last. I'd spent years coding through long nights building my reputation one contract at a time. I wasn't flashy. I didn't spend big. I was careful. And Brandon, he'd used that money to play dress-up in someone else's life. Taylor asked if I wanted her to start locking things down. I told her yes. Within the hour, she changed every password and revoked his permissions across the business accounts. She even flagged suspicious activity with the bank and set alerts on the corporate cards. By 3 a.m., he couldn't touch a cent. The next morning, Taylor sent over screenshots with a few transactions she'd missed the night before. One stood out $6,000 to a marketing firm with no address and no working website. I looked it up myself and found a shell, just a generic template with stock photos, no names, no phone number. I texted Taylor fake. She replied, "Almost certainly." That was when I called Morgan. She worked with Brandon, handled events and logistics, and I'd met her once during a planning session. She struck me as competent, maybe even a little fed up with Brandon's flair. She picked up quickly. I didn't say much, just asked if she'd noticed anything unusual. There was a pause. Then she said, "I've been waiting for this call." Morgan didn't hold back. She told me Brandon had been promising payments the company couldn't afford, showing up to meetings in designer suits he couldn't explain, and making big promises to clients that never came through. She said the team was always on edge, covering gaps, smoothing over missed deadlines. She'd flagged a few things herself, but got brushed off. She offered to send me a file, a running list of expenses, vendor issues, and Brandon's internal approvals. When it came through, I opened it line by line, comparing it to Taylor's findings. They matched. Personal purchases marked as company expenses, vendor names with no contracts to back them up. Dozens of discrepancies that all pointed to the same pattern. Brandon had been bleeding the company dry for months, and I'd been footing the bill. I leaned back in the chair, letting it all settle. This wasn't a single bad decision. It was a routine, a system, one he was confident no one would question because I never had, and our parents wouldn't either. Morgan mentioned that Brandon often name-dropped investors that didn't exist, used my title as a developer to give credibility during meetings, and exaggerated client lists to draw attention. She didn't have access to his personal accounts, but she had enough to paint the full picture. "He's been using your name more than you think," she said. I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to share anything else that came up. She said she would and promised to keep things quiet for now. Before we hung up, she added, "I think he's in too deep to admit it, Rachel. He's built his whole world around the illusion." By the time I closed my laptop, the sun had started creeping through the hotel blinds. Dylan stirred beside me but didn't wake up. I looked over at him, then down at my phone, and scrolled back through the photos from the beach, the ones Brandon and my parents had posted on the day I got married. Smiling, holding drinks, not a care in the world. I hadn't even begun to process what they'd done. But now I understood why they didn't show up. They weren't avoiding a wedding. They were protecting a lie, one that had cost me more than just money. And it wasn't over yet. I knew Brandon would call once he realized what I'd done. I also knew he wouldn't be the only one. My parents had always looked the other way when it came to him, but this time they wouldn't have the chance to pretend it didn't happen. I didn't plan to argue. I just planned to be ready. The morning after Taylor froze the accounts, my phone started buzzing before I'd even poured coffee. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Brandon didn't waste time pretending. "What the hell did you do?" He snapped his words, sharp, brittle. "I can't get into the banking portal and the cards declined. Fix it!" I didn't raise my voice. I just told him the truth. I locked it. He started to talk over me, but I didn't stop. "I've seen the charges, the Porsche, the boutique gear, the Rolex." There was a pause, then a forced laugh. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he said. "It's for the business. I've been under a ton of pressure." He kept going something about networking and optics and how I'd tank everything if I didn't stay quiet. I let him talk until he ran out of excuses, then said plainly, "Nothing moves until every dollar is accounted for." Before he could respond, I hung up. The next call came 5 minutes later. Ellen's name flashed on my screen. I debated letting it ring, but I picked up. Her tone was softer, almost motherly. "Sweetheart, your brother's been under so much stress," she said gently. "You know how hard he's been trying." I didn't say anything. Then I heard Frank in the background. "Tell her to stop making this worse." Ellen kept going. "Just unlock the account so we can handle this as a family." I told her I wasn't undoing anything. Her voice tightened. "You don't understand how this looks." I told her I understood exactly how it looked. Then I ended the call. I sat in silence after that, my phone still in my hand. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Dylan was in the kitchen making breakfast, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't cried. But something had snapped, not from anger, just clarity. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet Taylor had sent. My eyes moved slowly across the columns, each entry more blatant than the last. The Porsche payment wasn't alone. There was another $15,000 wired to a jewelry store near South Beach. Custom order paid in full. The invoice description read, "Rolex engraved." Another $8,000 flagged under event marketing was traced to a nightclub, the same one Brandon had posted photos from last month. VIP bottle service custom signage, a velvet rope with the startup logo printed across it. It wasn't marketing, it was theater. I clicked through a few more tabs, each one confirming what Morgan had told me Brandon wasn't spending to grow the business. He was spending to grow the illusion of one. What hurt more than the money were the patterns I couldn't ignore. I'd always cleaned up after him, covered overdrafts, smoothed things over with vendors, filled in gaps when clients called with questions. I told myself it was temporary, that one day he'd steady himself and I'd be proud I stuck it out. Even before the startup, it was like that. When his first real job fell through, I gave him the deposit for his apartment. When his car broke down, I co-signed the loan for the new one. When our parents fell behind on their mortgage, I picked up the phone and paid the bill directly. They never asked directly. They just assumed I would. Brandon got credit for every little win. I got quiet thank yous, if that. I wasn't bitter then. I believed that's what you did when you had a good job, when you didn't have kids of your own to worry about. You looked after family. Now I saw what that had turned into, not love, not gratitude, but entitlement. Even after what happened at the wedding, even after they chose a beach day over me, Ellen still called to ask me to fix it. That evening I called Morgan again. Her voice was quiet, like she was speaking from a hallway. "He doesn't know I've talked to you," she said, "but I've got more." She'd stayed late at the office and pulled backups from the company's server vendor contracts, travel receipts, even internal emails where Brandon pitched phantom partnerships to real clients. She zipped everything up and sent it over. The folder was nearly a gigabyte of documents, screenshots, and PDF exports. It took me an hour to get through it. There were fake invoices, doctored quotes, and a marketing plan that had been copied from a competitor's website right down to the font. He wasn't disorganized. He was deliberate. That thought settled heavy in my chest. I didn't reach out to my parents again. I didn't try to explain or defend what I'd done. I knew how this would play out. They'd circle around him like always, talk about loyalty, tell each other I was overreacting. That's what they did when Brandon got caught sneaking credit cards in college, or when he lied about finishing school. There was always a softer version of the truth for him. The silence that followed over the next few days wasn't loud. It was just expected. No texts, no apologies. No one reached out to ask why I'd done what I did. They already knew. And they'd already chosen which side they were on. The longer the silence stretched, the more it confirmed what I had started to suspect. I wasn't part of the family the way I thought I was. I was just the safety net. But not anymore. Morgan's second folder came through on a Thursday morning tucked inside a zipped drive labeled Plainly Operations Backup. I opened it while the apartment was still quiet. Dylan had already left for work. I sat at the dining table in my robe sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolled through the first few files. The documents were cleaner than I expected. A full list of vendor payments, invoices, proposals, all with Brandon's initials. But when I clicked on a line item for a yacht rental company, the address led nowhere. I ran a reverse lookup on the business number, disconnected. The website domain was registered just 3 months earlier to a privacy-locked account. Another invoice claimed payment for luxury partner services with a stamped signature from a consulting firm. I copied the firm's name and searched. The site was bare stock photos, no bios, no team, no phone. It was a front. Just enough to look real on paper, but hollow when pressed. There was more. Taylor pulled receipts from the card Brandon had used to wine and dine what he called prospective investors. Bottle service charges, designer tailoring, an entire weekend stay at a boutique hotel during a yacht show he didn't even have a booth at. She sorted each charge into a timeline, syncing it with Morgan's files. The overlap was unmistakable. I leaned back, resting my palm on my forehead. It wasn't about messy bookkeeping. It wasn't even about ambition that got out of hand. Brandon had built a fiction and played it with confidence because he'd never expected anyone to look closely. Taylor called that afternoon. "I've flagged more than a dozen charges that could fall under wire fraud," she said. "At this point, it's not about recovery. It's about exposure." Her voice was steady, but she asked if I was ready for what came next. I told her yes. We started drafting a full report, not for law enforcement yet, but for the people who had trusted the company's story. I asked Taylor to keep pulling transactions and flag anything linked to vendors that didn't have a business license. Meanwhile, I texted Morgan and asked if she had access to the company's pitch decks, anything Brandon might have sent to investors. She sent back 4 versions over the next day. The files were slick-polished, professionally formatted. Logos of supposed partners sat at the bottom of every slide. I clicked on one, a luxury cruise line. I knew someone who worked there. I reached out and asked if their brand had ever collaborated on a Miami event platform. They hadn't, not once, not even in early talks. Each call I made led to the same dead ends, no partnerships, no pending deals, no official involvement. Brandon had copied logos, lifted blurbs from real websites, and built a fantasy of legitimacy. The pitches were smoke. I compiled each confirmation into a binder. Taylor helped me sort it into 3 sections: falsified partnerships, misused funds, and internal deception. One file made me stop. It was an email Brandon had sent to a private investor promising guaranteed VIP placement at our South Beach series. I checked the date. That series never happened. He'd canceled it quietly 2 weeks before. No announcement, no refund issued. But the investor had wired funds 3 days after the email. I called Morgan. "How many clients do you think believed this was real?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Most of them. Until now." I spent the rest of the week stitching the pieces together. Between Taylor's spreadsheets and Morgan's internal backups, we had a full picture, nearly $150,000 redirected to Brandon's personal accounts or funneled through fake vendors. Investors misled. Clients promised services that didn't exist. I didn't contact Brandon again. There was no point. I didn't contact Ellen or Frank either. Not after they tried to convince me this was about stress, about timing, about family tension. The numbers didn't lie. Neither did the trail of fake logos and unfulfilled contracts. The moment of clarity wasn't loud. It didn't come in a rush. It came in the quiet when I closed the last file, saved the master folder, and sat still for a while. He hadn't just borrowed from me. He'd bet his entire identity on the assumption that I'd never say no. But I had. And now I had the proof to show why. The investor meeting was set for 10 o'clock sharp, virtual 5 people dialing in from different corners of Miami, all of them tied to the company Brandon had pitched as the next luxury event brand on the coast. I wore a plain navy blouse, tied my hair back, and logged in 10 minutes early. The room around me was quiet. Dylan had gone to work, and even the neighbors seemed still for once. I sat facing the screen, waiting for the final name to appear. Carla joined last. She was sharp-eyed quick with her questions during early funding rounds, and the only one I wasn't sure which way she'd lean. I didn't waste time with introductions. Once everyone was in, I shared my screen and started scrolling through the files. "I'm going to walk you through where your money went," I said. "Steady but not cold. This won't take long." The first document was a payment log, clear-dated, annotated. $25,000 wired to a luxury auto dealership, $12,000 in boutique yacht gear, a $15,000 Rolex with Brandon's initials engraved on the back. None of it related to events marketing or operations. I moved to the next slide, fake vendor profiles, including the shell companies that Brandon had used to reroute funds. Stock photos, no licenses, no real business behind them. Carla leaned closer to her camera. "Is this verified?" she asked. I nodded. Every name cross-checked, every receipt backed by statements I said. Taylor had helped compile the report. Morgan had supplied the backups. I had spent 2 sleepless nights stitching it together. Brandon Square stayed silent for the first 10 minutes. His camera was off. I could hear faint rustling on his end, maybe pacing, maybe just trying to stay composed. But when I pulled up the email promising a partnership with a cruise line that had never heard of us, his voice finally came through. "This is a misunderstanding," he said almost too quickly. The partnerships were in progress. I just didn't have confirmation yet. "You're jumping the gun." I didn't respond. Instead, I clicked into the invoice for the Rolex. I read the vendor line out loud, then the custom engraving, then the payment date. The silence that followed was long. Carla broke it. "You want us to believe a personal watch is a business write-off?" she asked, her tone flat. One of the other investors, Daniel, who'd backed the marketing rollout, sighed and turned his camera off. Another muted herself and didn't come back. I closed the screen share. "That's all I have for now," I said. "But there's more if you need it." No one asked for more. The call went quiet again until Carla spoke. "I think we all know what needs to happen," she said. The group agreed to freeze operations. An external audit was scheduled for the following week. Brandon didn't say anything else. By noon, the ripple had already started. A real estate partner who'd been considering a resort tie-in emailed me to say the deal was off. Someone had forwarded them the call summary. A local business blog posted a short article later that afternoon, vague but clear enough to connect the dots. The headline read, "Luxury Event Startup Faces Internal Scrutiny After Investor Shakeup." Brandon's name wasn't mentioned, but those who knew the space didn't need it to be. I watched the shares climb hour by hour. Clients called off meetings. Vendors paused contracts. He didn't call me, but Grace did. Her voice cracked as soon as she said hello. "Is it true?" she asked. I didn't soften anything. I sent her the same folder I'd shown the investors. She thanked me. An hour later, Kay texted to say Grace had packed a bag and left their condo. I didn't ask how she knew. Kay always knew. She sent a short message that night. "You shook the tree. The apples are falling." I didn't respond. Not yet. 2 weeks passed quietly. Brandon had gone silent. Grace was staying with her sister in Fort Lauderdale, and the startup's website had been taken down for maintenance. I focused on work, tried to reset. Most days it worked until the afternoon Taylor called and said, "You need to see this, right now." She forwarded an email from a contact she had at a regional bank. Attached was a scanned loan application for $50,000. The business name listed was Reef Line Accessories, supposedly a high-end retail shop for yacht apparel and luxury marina goods. I hadn't heard of it, but what stopped me cold was the second page. My name. Printed in bold as cosigner. My signature was there too. But it wasn't mine. The strokes were close but too smooth. The R was slightly slanted the wrong way. It looked like someone had practiced then traced. I called Taylor immediately. "Who submitted this?" I asked. Her voice was clipped already in motion. "Frank and Ellen. They're listed as the primary applicants." The breath caught in my chest. They hadn't called, hadn't said a word. Just gone ahead and filed a loan using my name without even asking. Taylor had already spoken with her contact. The bank flagged it as suspicious. I told her to notify them that I hadn't authorized a thing and that the signature was a forgery. I also asked her to check if it had happened anywhere else. 3 hours later, she found a second application at a different bank. This one was for $30,000 submitted 5 days earlier. Same business name, same forged signature, same lie. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the cursor blinking in an empty email draft. I typed slowly. "I know about the loan applications. They've been stopped. Don't try this again." I sent it to both Frank and Ellen. No greeting, no sign-off. Neither replied. That weekend, Morgan called to say someone from a regulatory agency had reached out to her quietly off the record, asking about Brandon's vendor contracts. Someone had tipped them off. She didn't ask if it was me. I didn't answer. The investigation wasn't public yet, but things were moving. Taylor gathered the forged loan documents and added them to the audit file. We filed formal notices with both banks requesting that any further activity tied to my name be blocked unless I appeared in person. The fallout was quick. Word spread through Miami's business circles that Brandon was under scrutiny. A local journalist who covered small startups posted a vague but pointed update on her blog. It mentioned forged documents, investor fraud, and multiple flagged accounts tied to a once promising events brand. She didn't name Brandon, but everyone knew who she meant. Clients stopped returning his calls. A vendor group that had sponsored his last event posted a statement saying they'd cut ties permanently. One former investor wrote a scathing message on LinkedIn warning others to vet who they backed more carefully. Brandon's name wasn't trending, but in his world, it didn't need to be. The doors were quietly closing. Kay kept me posted on the family chat. Most of the cousins had gone quiet. One uncle posted a message that read, "Should have stepped in sooner," followed by a shrug emoji. Ellen tried to keep the tone light, offering barbecue invites, movie night plans, but only 1 or 2 relatives responded. Most stayed silent. Frank didn't say a word. Not online. Not to me. Then one afternoon I saw a missed call from Ellen. No voicemail, just the number. I didn't call back. The next day she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door, unsure whether to step back or shut it. She looked tired. Her shoulders were tense, her blouse wrinkled like she'd slept in it. "Rachel," she said softly, "we need to talk." She stepped inside without waiting, clutching her purse like it was a shield. "Your brother's lost everything," she said as she sat down. "His home, his wife, his business. He's not eating. He's not sleeping. He doesn't know what to do next." I stood near the doorway. She glanced at me, searching for something in my face. We were just trying to help him get back on his feet. Just a little support to get a new shop started, something smaller, something manageable. I didn't speak. "I know we should have told you," she said, "but we didn't think you'd say yes. And we couldn't just do nothing." My voice was steady. "You forged my name." She flinched. "It wasn't. We thought it wouldn't go that far. Just the paperwork. The bank would call if there were questions. It wasn't meant to hurt you." I didn't move. "It's fraud." She stood, purse still clutched tight, and looked around the apartment like it belonged to a stranger. "You're punishing all of us for his mistakes," she said. "This everything, it's tearing the family apart." I didn't answer. She walked toward the door, then turned back once more. "We're struggling, Rachel." "Can't you see that?" Her voice cracked as she stepped into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't follow. Later that night, Kay texted me. "Ellen's saying you're selfish. But half the family's on your side now. They just won't say it out loud." I didn't respond. The audit wrapped at the end of the month. The numbers confirmed what we already knew. Brandon had siphoned more than half of the company's liquid assets through fraudulent vendors, padded invoices, and personal luxuries masked as business expenses. The remaining funds were frozen pending investor review. Taylor sent me the final tally that Friday. Of the $200,000 I had put in, just over $180,000 was recoverable. I filed the withdrawal paperwork the same afternoon. As primary investor, I had the right to remove my stake, especially with the company entering dissolution. It was all above board, signed, stamped, cleared. But I didn't transfer the funds back into my personal account. Instead, I sent half $90,000 to a Miami nonprofit focused on coral reef preservation and coastal restoration. The donation was made in my name and listed publicly in their quarterly newsletter. Brandon used my money to buy bottle service and polish his image. I used what was left to protect the ocean he once pretended to care about. That contrast wasn't lost on anyone. By the following Monday, Brandon's condo in Edgewater was listed as vacated. Grace had finalized the divorce, separating her name from every piece of Brandon's financial mess. His Porsche had already been repossessed. The building manager told Kay he left with one suitcase and no forwarding address. He moved back in with Frank and Ellen, not a word to me. Kay kept texting updates, even though I didn't ask for them. She said the old house was tense, Ellen constantly on edge, Frank getting short-tempered, Brandon rarely leaving his childhood bedroom. He didn't cook, didn't clean, didn't contribute. He just mopes, she wrote once, like he's waiting for someone to rescue him. The tension stretched beyond the walls of their house. Word had spread through the neighborhood enough that Ellen stopped hosting game nights and Frank began skipping church. One neighbor asked Kay outright if the rumors were true. She didn't answer. A few weeks later, I got another text from Kay. The house had gone into foreclosure, missed mortgage payments, no reserves left, too many late fees. They had to move. The new place was a rental in the outskirts of Hialeah, one bedroom short of what they needed paint peeling near the roofline. Kay sent me a picture. I didn't reply. The startup was officially dissolved 2 months after the audit. The assets were liquidated. Any remaining funds were split among vendors owed and investors who had filed claims. The regulatory board had opened an investigation into Brandon's activities, wire fraud, falsified contracts, and forged documentation. No formal charges yet, but the inquiry was public record. It was enough to blacklist him from most of Miami's investor circles. A former associate posted a short note on LinkedIn, not naming him directly but clear in its intent. "Trust is earned," it read, "and sometimes lost for good." The family group chat had gone silent. No birthdays, no barbecue invites, no forwarded memes from Ellen. The cousins had split. A few stayed loyal, but most didn't know what to say anymore. Even the ones who agreed with me didn't say it out loud. That was fine. Taylor sent me a link one afternoon. The charity I donated to had launched a new campaign using the funds to expand a restoration project near Biscayne Bay. They'd named the reef section after the donor group. My name was printed in clean serif type, listed alongside 3 others. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the tab and got back to work. The final message I got from Frank came a week later. It was short, just 3 words. "You got everything." I didn't respond. I didn't reply to Frank's message. There wasn't anything left to say. He was right in a way. I had gotten everything. The truth, the evidence, the money I could still recover. But more than that, I'd gotten clarity. And once you see things clearly, there's no going back. 3 months after the company dissolved, I stepped out onto the balcony of our new place, a quiet condo tucked above the marina where the city hum softened into something almost peaceful. Dylan handed me a cup of tea and sat beside me. The sky was turning dusky pink, and the air smelled like salt and jasmine. I hadn't realized how much weight I'd been carrying until it was gone. Brandon never reached out. Last I heard from Kay, he'd stopped applying for jobs, said it wasn't worth the embarrassment. Grace had filed to remove his name from their shared accounts, and she'd started teaching private yoga again. Frank took a part-time security job. Ellen picked up shifts at a local discount store. The house they lost had been stripped of more than furniture it had taken with it, the illusion that everything would always work out if someone else just cleaned up the mess. And for years, that someone was me. I'd spent most of my adult life filling the gaps they left behind, quietly paying overdue bills, stepping in when Brandon stumbled, telling myself it was what family did. But when my wedding came, they chose the beach. And when Brandon's lies unraveled, they chose to forge my name rather than ask for help. That was the line they crossed. Not because of the money, but because they never once saw me as someone worth choosing. I used to wonder if I should have handled it differently, if maybe I could have protected them without letting it all fall apart. But some things don't need saving. Some things need ending. In the end, I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the freedom to stop carrying what wasn't mine. And that's exactly what I got. There's a coral reef not far from here, part of a conservation project I helped fund with the money Brandon didn't get to spend. They named a section of it after the donors. When I visit, I stand at the shore and imagine it growing quietly below, bright and alive in a place he'll never touch. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like peace. Thanks for listening to my story. If any part of it stayed with you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from or what it made you think about. And if you haven't already, feel free to subscribe for more stories like this one.